Thank you so much, Keenan, for hopping on the DaoLens Discord space. Extremely excited to host you, extremely excited to learn from you, and extremely excited to get to know your story. I think one of the first questions I'd love to ask you is, what was your introduction to crypto, NFTs, blockchain, and the world of decentralization?
Yeah, and quickly before I start with that, I just wanted to say that the banner you had for this space, absolutely beautiful. It's nice to see, my face. It's very interesting. In crypto normally it's the PFP, so very nice to see that.
Thank you so
but how
much.
I got started, my very first entry was funny enough, maybe a bit of an embarrassing story, but the Dogecoin Genesis event. I think that was late 2013. So nearing up on 9-10 years that I've been involved in the space. Of course, I was quite young then. You can tell I'm quite young now. So I wasn't really fully committed to it at that point. Kind of throughout the next couple of years, I was working with some smaller projects, doing moderation, kind of like the lower level commitments to some of these projects, mainly focusing on learning. And then slowly kind of building up, working with more projects, and then I became I was pseudo-anonymous all of that time, but this is my first time with a full identity here at DxDAO, and I started DxDAO, I think it must be over a year and a half ago now. It would have been Christmas of 2021 maybe, or late 2020 rather. So yeah, and then I've been with DxDAO for the last year and a half.
That's amazing. What inspired you to start DxDAO? Before that, were you contributing to others' DAO? You saw how exciting, empowering it is, and you wanted to start your own?
Yeah, I think the story of DxDAO for me is interesting because the power of a DAO is really the ability to see it do it, I like to say, where you identify that there's something missing and you can say, hey, I can do that. Do you guys want me to take this over? So DxDAO for me, I actually was very little in the knowledge of DAOs, was more so in kind of like general DeFi. And someone from DxDAO spotted me as like, hey, we need, what you're doing here at DxDAO. I popped over and started with like the very basics of what was needed. It was like, okay, well, we need someone to do community management, kind of this communications outlet. And then I think that's where like the power of DAOs really kicked in for me, where it's like this stepping stone of like, oh, hey, this needs to be done and it's not going to get done. So like, it's very relevant to me. I'm going to do it. And then building that up. And now here I am much later with a larger responsibility pool. I kind of lead our community content efforts. And that's all like a stepping stone process. I don't think in a DAO necessarily you can enter and just be this miraculous leader. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things to learn, I think.
100%. That's amazing. So you started DxDAO, or were you one of like the core people in the team and you guys collectively started it?
Yeah, so didn't start DxDAO, although I'd love to. I think there's some old timers here in the audience. Basically, DxDAO was formed in mid 2019, I believe. One of the earlier DAOs, of course, after the DAO. It was spawned by Gnosis and DAO Stack. It was kind of put together to govern, I think, the DutchX protocol. So that was like the genesis of the DxDAO. But of course, it's difficult to kind of coordinate around nothing. Like we had this DAO with reputation, but there wasn't the treasury, there wasn't funds, there wasn't really a discernible goal. So kind of people were piddling about and then started to kick off the DxDAO. Like, what are we going to do? What is our vision moving beyond kind of DutchX? Did a token launch through a bonding curve. I believe that was early 2020. And that kind of bootstrapped the treasury and funded it. And that, of course, has been used for runway and developing products. And then I guess maybe a bit of time to talk about DxDAO itself, because I'm not sure I had a good chance. But I think DxDAO, we really focus on, of course, we're a DAO. I know you guys at DaoLens are familiar with the term. But we're very focused on the DeFi ecosystem, and I guess decentralization is really our deepest value. True decentralization is what I like to say. Right. I think as long as the technology permits it, we aim to make everything and have no compromise in the space of decentralization. When we're forced to use centralized outlets, of course, like Discord is a good example. We're actively aiming to solve it through either grants or through developing a product or something. So that's kind of like our primary focus is decentralize everything, decentralize X. And that kind of goes even to our front ends. And one of the few things that we think were unique, of course, we're seeing projects starting to do it now, which we'll get into in a little bit. But even our front ends are decentralized, all the way from the back end to the front end of our product stack is decentralized. We host our products through IPFS. We set our ENS content hash directly through the DAO. So you require an on-chain vote to change the landing page or the front end of the DApp. And then it's resolved through, a decentralized router, ETHLAMO natively. So we kind of try to do everything completely decentralized. We're focused on DeFi, but I think we're not married to DeFi, if that makes sense. We're kind of open to, really wherever we can propagate decentralization.
That's amazing. I'd love for you to dive deeper into the story of why decentralization matters to you guys deeply. And I would like to start with DxDAO recently, spoke about how they strongly believe in code is speech and how they are standing up for decentralized value. That was the first time I heard about the decentralized value term. I would love for you to dive deeper into that.
Yeah, so for those of you not aware, very big situation kind of happening in the last week. And I will say, it's like every single week is like a dozen things going on as of late, it feels like. But the big thing in the decentralized space lately is Tornado Cash, a decentralized Ethereum mixer on, I guess it's on the Ethereum network, maybe Gnosis chain as well. They were essentially sanctioned by the US Treasury, put on the OFAC blacklist, which was interesting. Of course, you can blacklist the smart contract and like interacting with it. But there has been more interesting developments where kind of the native countries of the people that committed to the decentralized code, the open source code, of course, they're actually arrested. Of course, the reason there isn't a stronger stance from our side right now is that it's unclear if it's because they committed to the code or if it's because, they were involved in some other way, they were laundering money maybe. There's a lot of possibilities that we don't fully know the whole story. But we believe deeply that code is speech. If you're writing code, it's open source code. It's not a crime to do that. Right. In the same way, of course, this is maybe a straw man, but will you arrest the people that produce firearms because there's people that use them in malicious ways, right? Yeah. Of course, you can use a mixer in a malicious way, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a malicious tool. And I think there's a very, very strong important reason to have privacy on the Ethereum network, and we're seeing that why that's important right now, kind of as everything's blowing up, and that's down to the RPC level. That's down to like the routers. Like everything is like a big question mark, and it's kind of been a scramble mess the last week or so.
It has been, and I feel so sorry to hear that, right? Like this place, as amazing as it is, as much as leverage and opportunity as it is, there's also so many risks involved, and that is such a clear example of it, how difficult it has been, for people who are pioneering in this space, to move forward. Just piggybacking off of that question, what is your perspective on people's negative attitude towards crypto, calling it a fad, or even like news like this? Like I'm seeing and talking to so many people who DAOs more than anything. NFTs also had that hype where people were in it for the art, in it for the money, in it for the hype. But people who are involved in DAOs seem deeply passionate about the technology and the mission that the DAO is like driven by. So what would your perspective be on people's kind of negative attitude towards this space?
I think you actually recapped it pretty well. I think the DAO space itself is kind of removed in most part from this kind of hype, crypto bro style of environment. And I think that crypto gets a bad rep from people, especially those less educated in the space. Because there's the vocal minority effect of those that are, running these kind of like Ponzi's and running, talking about their coin and shilling it. They're kind of like that vocal minority. And there's a lot of very, very smart and talented people working very deeply in kind of like the actual technology that definitely don't get the drumbeat as much, I would say. So I think my stance is that broadly the world needs to not wake up. Sorry, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Broadly the world needs to kind of warm up to crypto. I think it's obvious kind of based on what's going on even right now, why what we're doing is important, particularly those building out these technologies. and moving towards that. I think the world will start to warm up a little bit on that over time, especially there's an ageist kind of thing where, the older generation that didn't grow up with it maybe is less educated, maybe is more opposed to it. And then you have these people kind of growing up with the technology that start to adopt it, right? So I think it just needs time, and that will kind of natively phase itself out. I think it's, it's important what we're doing, and I think that will be recognized in time.
Definitely. Why would you say DxDAO is so deeply passionate about decentralized everything? Why is that one of the core values for you guys?
I think there's a lot of very good reasons why that's the case. I think the main reason in the way that we want to operate is we're completely open source, so anyone can join and work. And we have the aspect of like immutability. Anyone that's contributing, anyone that's participating, if I were to disappear, DxDAO should still be able to run, right? If the entire current contributor base were to disappear, DxDAO should still be able to operate, should still be able to manage its treasury. So on that side of like the immutability, the ability for someone to come and take over the reins if there was a problem, I think that's super, super important to us, especially to a DAO. And that kind of trails to this kind of like true decentralization that I mentioned earlier, where basically there's a lot of DAOs nowadays, and I think this is improving, and we're seeing that kind of happen. There's a lot of DAOs that are effectively mock DAOs, in my perspective.
Yeah.
DAOs that will have governance and like you can token vote through, say, Snapshot, but essentially it's an underlying multi-sig executing the transactions, and that's not decentralized because you're relying on a single operator or a couple of signers to hold true to the DAO. I think another way that we're special is everything has been completely on chain from the start. Yeah. We have proposals to do anything, if it's moving funds, if we're signaling, if we're authorizing something. So that's another very, very important thing to us, is that things actually happen on chain, and that's what matters to the DAO. Of course, anyone can say, like for right now, I could be speaking on behalf of DxDAO, but it technically doesn't matter because I'd have to authorize something on chain, and that's why I'm being careful with this discussion about Tornado, because we don't know what's happening, and DxDAO hasn't had a formal stance on that specific situation, for example.
For sure. Very newbie question, but
yes.
All of these things are not taught in school, right? About multi-sig wallets, decentralization, how to operate, how to vote, how to be a DAO admin. Where would you say you learned all of the technicalities of this space to even like dive deeper? I feel like people now looking at Web3 from a distance are feeling intimidated because it's like such a new world and there's so many new terms. But the people who've deeply been in it are understanding it's not that different. These are things we've done over and over again. This is just a new sort of infrastructure we're doing it in. So where did you learn everything you know?
Yeah, I think the way I learned was maybe a bit unique. I kind of started around when there wasn't really much, as I mentioned, kind of Dogecoin and very passively throughout the next couple of years. So I kind of learned the terminology and grew with it. I think there's a lot of good resources nowadays that maybe I'm not completely attuned to. I know Bankless has a pretty good collection of information and kind of that introduction. But like you said, I think there really is this barrier of like the terminology and kind of understanding like what's the word? Not inside joke, but inside terminology, I guess. That like the community likes to utilize, like for example, and this can go back to like the crypto bro, outside perception, where it's like everyone's saying, wag me, GM over and over again, and it doesn't make sense unless like what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like the first barrier, is understanding the language, and then from there it's really. It's almost like an individual basis of where you want to focus on. For example, if you want to learn AMM infrastructure, then you're going to take a very different path than someone that's wanting to learn community management for broad crypto systems, right?
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel like one of the biggest reasons and the biggest I don't know, I can't get the term for it, but is curiosity. Like, be curious and pursue those questions, because no one came here, knowing everything. I feel like every day things are evolving, and you just have to be curious, you just have to be up to date, and we're just getting started. So there are no experts in this space. Everyone is really, really beginning, no matter how long they've been in the space. And just coming off again on that question, I'd love for you to dive deeper into why are you super passionate about the Web3 space? What makes you want to pursue a career in it? Not just read about it, not just talk about it, but pursue a career in it. Why not AI? Why not other areas of tech? Why Web3?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of very good reasons. One of them, of course, is that I'm very passionate about financial instruments, and kind of like I know there is actually John on this call. I use the word tokenomics, as I'm sure you might have heard in the past. Very passionate about those and like very novel implementations of economic structure. So that was kind of my initial, starting point. But I think very broadly, Web3 in general is going to change everything. The very, very basic way to visualize this is obviously having an email and password for every site you visit versus having a hardware wallet signer that gives you your profile. It has your basically all your information logged into the new site. Boom! Like it's such an ease of access for use itself, and this is beyond even like a crypto landscape. This is just solely focusing on like logging in with Web3, right? So I think there's like a lot, like the future is moving towards this technology. I do think it is still quite early for kind of a mass adoption. Maybe we're a bit ahead of ourselves in where we are now. There's lots of learning. Like you said, there's a majority of people are still kind of learning and like bolstering their knowledge. And I think that a lot of the problems that we're all facing, there's going to be that's a solution. Like it's just going to pop up and be like, okay, cool. Because we have all of these talented people kind of learning and building towards it. I think I'm very passionate about it for those reasons. And of course, decentralization, a very important thing to me. I guess a good example is that I'm in Canada. The Canadian government, I believe 3 or 4 months ago, maybe a bit longer, they actually froze the bank accounts of Canadians that participated in donating via crypto to certain organizations. Of course, I don't necessarily agree with those organizations, but more so the fact that the government would take those transactions and use them as leverage to freeze the livelihood of Canadians. I think that's not okay. I think it's important that you have control of your own funds. I don't like the idea of a bank owning my funds. Be your own bank is another great assessment of why I think I'm so aligned with this space.
100%. Completely agree. I think I was watching this guy Pomp, his podcast. He like heavily makes content on Bitcoin, and he speaks about all your hard-earned money. When it goes to a bank, it's not like you actually owning it, which is a big like awakening for a lot of people. And I feel like still people who understand what decentralization is capable of know how much how much value does ownership hold. So I think that's incredible. Just on that note, I would love to ask you, how do you see the DAO ecosystem today? How has it evolved in the past 6 months, or even when the hype got on with the Constitution DAO? How are you seeing it today on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think the DAO ecosystem is improving. You kind of noticed, I guess, kind of more throughout the bull market, that the term DAO didn't really mean anything, in the sense that people were calling basically anything a DAO. If it could execute something, it was being called a DAO. So I think there was kind of this hype phase, like you said. Maybe this was before or around the Constitution DAO kind of introduction. Not speaking directly to them, I'm not sure how exactly they executed transactions. But I think we're definitely improving. You're seeing a lot of projects be a little bit more serious about decentralization. I think, the D in DAO stands for decentralization. So it's really the most important part. And I think that we're moving towards that. There's still some major challenges. But generally, I think it's improving. I'm not sure to add to that. It's like, it's getting better. It had some challenges, and I think we're moving in the right direction. You'll even see that like with us. We're working on our own governance framework, governance 2.0. It's kind of a mix of our model of reputation governance. So basically, like earning your reputation, you can't sell it, so it doesn't have a financial backing. Combining that with kind of a mission-based governance. So we have making sure that you've applied yourself versus also owning a stake of the DAO, right? And we're noticing that while we're kind of working through that, we have a lot more people than ever before, projects that are very interested in the model and like, okay, we want to use this. We want to be decentralized, have things execute on chain. So I think, just broadly, I guess my thought is that like things are moving in the right direction. I think DAOs were basically in their infancy throughout this bull run. Despite us being around for a while, I think it's very obvious to us that it's starting to mature. There are still improvements to be had, though.
I'm so excited for you to hear about mission-driven, governance. I can't imagine how you guys are planning to execute it. Please do make content. I don't know how you guys communicate with the world, but you gotta. I think it's revolutionary, right?
Yeah.
Like for pioneers, evolving with these new technologies, there's so much mission driven in them. I don't feel like people are looking at these parts. They're still just looking at oh my god, intimidating space, lots of money, people are making lots of scammy things are happening. But these real things that are solving real problems in the most amazing fashion. I'd love to see what you guys have in the future. And on that note, what would you say is one of your biggest current pain point you are facing as a community leader and a contributor? What is your current pain point?
Yeah, I think I would say from the aspect of a community leader, I think having decentralized content tools that an on-chain DAO can own. Sorry if my mic's a bit loud, but I think that because of the unique way that we operate and wanting to move towards a completely on-chain nature, like the DAO speaks through the DAO, not people individually for the DAO. I think we need stronger tools that DAOs can own. And I think we're starting to see that through some products. I think Mirror is a good example where originally it was any Web3 wallet can own this Medium or not Medium, of course, blog. But a DAO couldn't necessarily own it because they would need to interact with the contracts. And it's how do you even start to do that, right? So they're moving in that direction. And I think there needs to be more tools that accommodate the way DAOs operate, being completely on-chain. That would be the biggest pain point. I think from a contribution standpoint, that's actually a very similar thing, but it's more broad. Instead of just community tools like Discord having centralized endpoints, how does a DAO own a Discord? There's this more broad, how does a DAO operate? How does a DAO pay someone in Web 2? How does a DAO coordinate with another DAO? How do you write a contract for that, right? So there's a lot of pain points. I think we're focusing on identifying a lot of them. We're talking with projects that are working towards those. We have DX Ventures, which is our investment arm. Basically, the goal of that is not necessarily to be a VC, but more so fund projects that are solving pain points for DAOs. Because we think, of course, DAOs are the future. We wouldn't be working here. So we think that is a lucrative thing to move towards. So that's our approach, I think, the main pain points to me.
That's awesome. And I have another question for you. How important do you think is the process of onboarding in a DAO?
Yes, I think it's incredibly important. And I think there's a lot of questions, and it basically boils down to how a DAO operates. The way that we deal with onboarding at DxDAO is we try to keep things as open as possible. You can identify where you can fit in, as I mentioned, but we run on a contributor proposal process. So typically, someone that's new will say, hey, I see this needs to be done. There's an open position here. I identified that this work needs to happen. They'll move through our onboarding process, which we actually have in our documentation resource. And that effectively starts with communicating with people hey, this is who I am. This is what I do. Nice to meet you. They move on directly from there to chat in the forum. They share a bit about their work and what they want to do. And then they move to an on-chain proposal. If that's authorized, then they're effectively working for that contribution period. So that's the formal way of doing things with DxDAO. We are open, of course, also to this open pipeline where it's hey, I see, there's some tickets in GitHub that need to be done. I'm going to take care of those and then maybe say, hey, I did all this work. Maybe you can give me a little bit of payment for that. So I think we're open to that as well. That's the more open route, but it's, of course, a little less structured. But I think that there's a lot of challenges typically in that onboarding process. And I think another way to visualize that is a lot of DAOs that I mentioned, this mock governance DAOs. The onboarding process really is just buying $1,000 worth of token and joining a Discord call, right? And is that good onboarding? I don't know. I mean, I don't do it, so maybe I'm missing something important along the way there. But I don't think financially aligning is necessarily the proper way to start with a onboarding process. I think it's more a value alignment, understanding what you're able to do and where that fits into the DAO. So I think it's it is very, very important, but maybe a bit specific to each project and where things are going.
For sure. And About tokenomics, do you think it's a good idea for a DAO to introduce tokenomics? And the reason I'm asking that is two debates, right? Everyone knows the benefits of tokenomics, how amazingly it can reward people. But the downside of it also could be that people just join a DAO to get that token and then start, it could become extremely like a big headache where people only care about, oh, like the token's not increasing in value, like, what are you guys doing? What are you not doing? That battle. So what's your perspective on like if it's a good idea for a community to have a token?
Yeah, so I think underlying, I think that communities should have tokens. I don't think typically, especially if there's a fund, like a treasury underlying, I don't think there's room to operate efficiently without one. In the way that DxDAO has operated previously, we launched this token with an economic claim to the underlying, I believe, profits of the treasury. So the DXD token, for example, would get the profits that DxDAO makes on its products. So I mean, that's like a basic kind of tokenomics model. Of course, tokenomics just being a broad word for the interesting economic mechanisms of an individual token. Yeah, I think it's very important to have a robust system. And I think that a lot of value for a lot of these tokens aren't really thought through completely in the sense that it's like, okay, let's make this token, we'll use it to fund operations. Its utility is to vote in those operations is a bit of an interesting, adage to me. It's like, okay, well, I'm buying this to vote only. It's a bit questionable, right? So like that model is necessarily like, I think that's a perfect model to distribute to people that are doing work. Right? If you're working and you get this voting power, it's like, oh yeah, I need to conflate these, how these decisions are made, and like I have strong opinions because I'm like tight with the work. Yeah. But the problem with that is that there's financial alignment with that token. So you need a buyer to be on the opposite end of that transaction. It's like, am I being paid in this token just to pay myself a living wage? Am I, there's a lot of questions there, I think, sure. And that's kind of why we focus on reputation governance. It's like we recognize that people should have this like voting power. But it shouldn't necessarily conflate with like a financial value. It's like, okay, you've done something meaningful. This is what you have a voice now because of this, right? Yeah. And that's not related to, selling the stake and then you don't have that voice anymore. It's like if you need to pay your bills, you're not negatively affecting the DAO in the sense that you don't have that voting power anymore. So we think that's like a perfect model. We do also recognize kind of on the tokenomics side, cycling back to governance 2.0, we recognize that the financial alignment of token holders is actually a very important part of the ecosystem. And just because there's a lot of problems with token governance, you can buy all the tokens and just like sway to vote completely, right? Because there's a lot of problems doesn't mean that, those community members that solely participate through financial commitment do not have value and do not have, should not have participation in the DAO's decision making, right? So that's kind of why we've ideated Governance 2.0, and that's our next kind of, tokenomics model. It isn't actually for our financial token DXD, but more so for the way DXD is utilized, where basically, you have to earn this reputation, you have to back it up with a financial instrument. So I can work, but in order to actually properly exercise that, I need to back it up with the DXD token. Right. So that's kind of our approach to that and why we think it's important. And I guess utility, is more of a personal thing. It's like, what can I do with this token? Why does it exist, right?
Yeah, for sure. I love how thoughtfully you guys are operating at DxDAO, how so much like thought is given to, your contributors, whether it's tokens, whether it's whatever, like I think it's amazing. Keenan, so super interested to know, is you guys as DAO admins, how are you operating internally on a day-to-day basis? From having your discussions on Discord to, voting on Snapshot to managing your treasury, having a DAO management tool, like so many different platforms for like one single task. How does your day-to-day look like as operators?
Operating, like how we operate, I think there's a lot of conflation. This is one of the primary pain points I kind of identified earlier, even. Is that, like you said, there's a lot of processes where even one process can be split across multiple, resources needing to utilize, as you say, Snapshot, needing to go to our form. So I think that day to day, things can get a little bit messy in the current state of the DAO world, especially for us trying to do it right and keep everything on chain and kind of cross-referencing, keep making sure, this has been said here, is it recognized on chain, finding it on chain, do we need to make a proposal, do we need to vote on the proposal, do we need to boost the proposal? So there's a lot of questions for each one individual task, I think, that need to be answered. But generally, I think we're efficient, mostly because we're so deep in the weeds that it doesn't actually hinder anything. It can just make things a little bit more confusing from an outside perspective. And that, of course, is a challenge for onboarding. It's like if what we're doing is confusing, if the payment process becomes something that a general contributor doesn't understand, does that make it open, right? Yeah. So we're trying to solve that as well. We have contributor UX, which is actually effectively HR for DAOs or people operations. I think it's a team of 2 right now. And basically they help facilitate payments. They help facilitate, this is how your reputation is going to work. This is how your DxD/equity is going to work. So they've been kind of easing that process and making that onboarding way easier, I think.
That's awesome. And how are you guys doing the payment system? Are people connecting wallets? You guys are paying in like crypto, or are you doing it in a Web2 format? How does that look like?
Yeah, so we have as I mentioned earlier, we have a guideline, which is effectively like, this is what level I'm committing myself as. So I have a certain experience level. There's, of course, some backing up information for that. And those come with associated dollar values. So it's like, okay, this level is going to be paid this much monthly on a contractual basis. So the way that actually happens is the user or community member will connect their wallet directly to our governance platform, originally Alchemy contracts. And basically you'll propose to the DAO the amount that you need to be paid alongside the text that says, okay, this is what I'll be focusing on in that time. Yeah. So authorizing that proposal pays you for that period. So you get the funds. And then, of course, that authorizes the work. So the idea is basically everything on chain, I guess, to nail the point another time. But proposing those individual worker contributions, and the DAO is like, okay, this is a value. Let me vote for this positively, negatively, etc.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Keenan. I was extremely excited to hop on to some community questions that we have waiting in the chat. Let's see what we have. Yash. Hi, Keenan. Love your thoughts. Quick question. A problem with an in-depth decentralization in product DAOs is slow development speed. It feels like an unsaid law that decentralization is inversely proportional to operational speed. How do you tackle this loss of pace at DxDAO?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenging one. If we're talking, bumps in the road, the way that we handle decentralization definitely, as you mentioned, has that kind of inverse operational speed. The way we develop code is we develop it. We have to, of course, make the release, and then the community has to update the ENS content hash. So once a build is actually complete, it still actually takes a little bit of time before it's live. So you can imagine there are some, hiccups and where that could cause some problems. Say there's some problem with the front end and we need to update it. That might actually take a 6-day voting period, for example, or actually I believe 4 with our holographic consensus model. So it is definitely a challenge. I feel like we have been working towards solving that. And the way, of course, is just based on our kind of operations and keeping things timelined. If we have to make a release, we'll kind of segment it. We'll release it in pieces so we have it out the door when it needs to be out the door. And I think kind of more on the developmental side, which of course I can't necessarily speak to as much. But there is definitely also the challenge of if you want everything to be decentralized, it imposes additional developmental time. It imposes additional, time and work essentially to kind of focus on those. And I think that's also why what we're doing is important, because these things don't necessarily exist. They're problems. If we're having problems as a DAO first, then there's going to be people having these problems going forward, right? So it's like identifying the problems and working towards them, solving them. So even if it is more challenging for us, as we kind of ramp up, we think it's solving important problems, and that's going to help us down the line as well on a more personal level, and kind of guiding other protocols, other DAOs. Like, okay, this is what you need to do. This is how you can work through these things, right?
For sure. Thank you so much for answering that. Would you like to read out the second question by Pawan?
Yeah, that's Pawan here. My question is, what incentive structures can be created in a community if the DAO doesn't have its own tokens? What behavior/engagement have you seen from contributors based on different incentive structures? So I guess referring to not having a financial token, I assume, and that's kind of the way DxDAO was around Genesis. And you could definitely identify like operable problems. Of course, people need to be paid to necessarily keep alignment because time is money. So I think there's a big challenge if there isn't any kind of underlying treasury or financial token in kind of coordinating and operating. Of course, you need dozens and dozens of things to scale, and if you don't have that underlying or funding, it's definitely a challenge. I think DxDAO did it as I guess innovative and impactful as they could have at the time, which is that reputation model I've mentioned a few times. Basically, getting rep for those contributions, and then it's basically condensing voting power to those that are actively working and like participating in the DAO. So you have these people that are voting and paying attention because they're more committed, right? And I think that kind of streamlined and pushed forward this kind of eventual token raise, and that's really what kickstarted everything, was kind of having that model. Of course, technically reputation is a token. It's non-transferable, but it is. So maybe that doesn't completely accurately answer the question. But we think that is kind of like the novel bootstrapping effect that really helped DxDAO succeed to where it is today. I guess from the behavior / engagement side, it's very clear, especially in our infancy, a lot of crypto is aligned with kind of like the dollar terms. Unfortunate, but it's a real thing. We think we have like a very strong community of people that are more focused on the tech than any dollar terms. But you'll see that kind of broadly. It's like, okay, I need to be paid. This is going to happen. Not that that isn't important, of course, but it's typically values first, knowing you're going to get compensated with DxDAO versus, I need to be compensated and then showing value, right? So we kind of like that approach as well.
Thank you so much for taking that up. Community, if you have any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. That's like the exciting thing about doing these sessions live. You have just a couple more minutes because we hate awkward silences. But Keenan, on an ending note, do you have any ending thoughts, any questions you'd like to ask, or like just anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, very excited about your content stream. I love seeing younger kind of products looking beautiful. And, your announcement banners are definitely very nice to look at. So appreciate that. Appreciate my pretty face, of course, being on the banner. That's great to see. Also fantastic to be here, of course. Great to be on a recorded call and have the opportunity to show my face again. So very appreciative of this space. And maybe I can give some final thoughts if there isn't any other questions here.
Yes, and that's all we have a phenomenal graphics team. Shout out to them. Amazing at what they do. I think we just send them the brief and they just do the magic. So yes, that's all credits to them. I believe we do not have any further questions. So Keenan, last question I'd like to ask you is your advice, which is what would be what would be one piece of advice you'd give to someone who wants to get more familiar with the crypto / DAO space? Like I said, it seems very intimidating, but yet people are like, burning with a passion to learn more about the space. They just don't know where to begin. So please.
Yeah, so I think I'm interpreting this as like someone that is newer to crypto and or, a little bit more on the learning side. I think as cliche as it is, diving headfirst really is the best way. Becoming uncomfortable and kind of putting yourself in those situations really is where most of the learning will happen. Of course, you can go through resources, but more importantly, finding communities that are doing things that I'm interested in. How do I join them? How do I participate in calls? How do I learn more about them? It's very cliche, and you have to be very self-driven, I think, to succeed in this space. But that really is the way to kind of kickstart yourself, is like identifying, this is important to me. This is the values I want to match. This is the communities taking care of those problems. Let me, see a way to kind of make myself acquaintable with that. I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much. Yes, self-driven, 100%. Yes, please, let's go with your ending thoughts.
Yeah, I guess maybe just some ending thoughts or kind of pointers to what we're doing. DxDAO, as a fully decentralized DAO, we're kind of trying to innovate in the DeFi space. I'm going to drop here in the chat our landing page where you can learn a bit more about what we are doing, but namely paying attention to kind of like our products, what we're doing. Of course, we're always welcoming to new people. If anyone's interested in figuring out more about us and joining the community, we have our Discord as well. Let me just find the chat here. Perfect. Yeah, we have a kind of suite currently, 5 products on our landing page. Swapper, our kind of flagship AMM, basically a Uniswap v2 fork with a focus on decentralization and privacy. We have Carrot, which is a conditional token framework. Basically, any condition that you can imagine, say this call having 100 participants, you can reward those people based on that condition being met. So say $100 kind of gift to everyone if a certain amount of people join the call. Like, it's a fun little novel way to distribute tokens and do things. We have Omen, which is a prediction market platform, predicting certain events, community knowledge. And then we have our kind of governance offering with DxGov. We're working towards governance 2.0 that I mentioned. And of course, more novel governance solutions and guilds kind of frameworks. But if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you'll have to come join us over in the DxDAO land, starting with the DxDAO landing page, of course, that I shared in the chat. But yeah, I really appreciate the time here. It was a really great chat. Excited to see some of this content repurposed and see my beautiful face once again on the Twitter space. Yeah, but thank you very much. I really appreciate being here, and it was a great call.
Thank you so much, Keenan. Thanks for being just amazing, a great energy, sharing that you were a DJ some time ago, and sharing your depth of knowledge in the DAO space. Like, it was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you everyone for joining this space. Please look forward to this call recording dropping on YouTube and the highlights of it dropping on YouTube Shorts, TikTok, and Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and every place you can imagine. We will penetrate there.
Excellent.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. See you guys. Have a nice week.
Thank you, guys.